Want to know the best settings for GoPros and spearfishing? Stay tuned for the upcoming video. Okay, firstly, camera settings. Now when it comes to camera settings, there's lots of hits, there's lots of misses, there's probably quite a few do's and don'ts, and there's a lot of information that is subject to debate. Through the years, a lot of trial and error, I have basically come up and I basically stick my camera on the same settings for pretty much every single dive all the times. Now this is a GoPro Hero 4 Black, that's the most recent one I have. I believe any newer models, pretty much the information is going to be exactly the same, like through the 5 and the 6 and things like that. What we're going to do now is go through my settings and why I choose them. Okay, firstly let's go into the GoPro app to basically show you how to set this camera up. This is the easiest way for me to show you what exactly my settings are. Okay, firstly from the top, video settings. Resolution 2.7K, 50 frames per second, field of view medium, which that is usually set for a head mount setup. Low lights on, spot meter off. ProTune is on. Now ProTune just gives us more data for the image, which is quite important when it comes to editing. White balance 4800K, GoPro color. Shutter's obviously on auto, left to auto, ISO limits 3200, sharpness low, and the exposure is -0.5. Okay, now let's actually break down why I've chosen to use these settings, why I think they're the best, why I probably wouldn't change to any other settings. Firstly, resolution and frame rate. Now this depends a lot on what your actually projects you intend them to export them at. This particular video file you're watching right now, I intend to export it at 1440p. I'm filming on a 4K camera right now and we're downscaling. So when I shoot GoPro videos, a lot of which is just going to a 1080p timeline, some of it goes to a 1440, we can even stretch a 2.7K file to 4K with sort of no real visual loss of quality. The reason I do go 2.7K though is because it has great ability, there's plenty of data in the image. We can blow that up to a 4K file if need be. I do export very seldomly at 4K, so that's hardly ever needed. It obviously downsizes to 1080p very well, as seen in sort of most of my vlogs. This also gives us the ability, because the 2.7K frame is much bigger than a 1080 frame, this basically gives us the ability to zoom in on a 1080p file without losing quality, as well as of course 2.7K is just a little bit bigger than a 1440p frame, so we can downsize that, downscale it slightly to this 1440 frame and still get the best image quality, as well at 50 frames per second. Now I don't believe here that we even need a higher frame rate for spearfishing clips. A lot of this is done, I export at 24 frames a second, so at 50 frames, you know, we can cut that in half and have nice slow-mo at 50% speed. I know a lot of people out there use like kind of the 1080p at 120 frames a second. Now the problem here with that is, in my mind, we do not need 120 frames a second. We do not need the ability to slow a lot of this footage down to 20%. Every now and then that might come in handy, but overall we don't, and the actual data available in the image at 120 frames is not that great. So I much prefer the 2.7K image at 50 frames. It does give us that little bit of slow-mo ability, but it still is allowing plenty of data in the image to do what you want with it. Okay, field of view. Now this is sort of like almost a way to digitally crop. I believe I'm not quite sure how GoPro exactly do this field of view change within camera. It's probably a digital crop, I'm assuming. I just feel the medium field of view, it's a bit narrower. I'll place something up on the screen right now. You can see it wide versus medium. It just makes you feel a bit closer to the action. Wide is very wide, and I used to use that, but I much prefer the medium setting now, as it gets you, just like I said, just that little bit closer to the action. ProTune, I mentioned ProTune earlier before. I always have ProTune on. It basically just gives you more data in the image, more ability when it comes to editing, and I feel it sort of gives you, you know, more scope if you want to change colors, which I do tend to do quite a lot with spearfishing. as well as GoPro color. I think they've got a flat setting or a log setting or whatever it is they have, but it was too flat, and you were sort of having to push and pull the file too much to get a nice looking picture in it. I have heard from GoPro Tech 2 that they use the GoPro color, so that's what that is set on. Now, white balance. This is something that I've heard on podcasts and people talking about video settings. People don't seem to lock the white balance. Now, this to me underwater is very, very important. I set it at 4800K because I kind of feel that's the most closest setting we can get to kind of the underwater feel. Any higher, like if it goes up to 5500K, you're getting a bit green, bit warm, and any lower at say 4000, I believe those are the settings, too blue. It's just too blue of an image. Now, the whole idea here with white balance, if you don't know what white balance is, it's just the color. The camera will match sort of what the colors around it are seeing. Now, you can kind of manipulate that and lock it, and this will stop the color shift that you see in a lot of diving videos, a lot of spearfishing videos, is a color shift. A lot of people a lot of the time say it's color in the water, but it's actually not. It's the white balance shifting as the camera's adjusting through the water. Now, I think this looks absolutely flippin' terrible in a clip. I want my white balance locked and set, so it's gonna the color of the water and the color of the picture is going to be exactly the same throughout the duration of that clip. And lastly, the actual camera exposure. Now, I sort of feel when you're at 0 or flip DSLR, go even higher, like a 0.5 exposure, put half a stop, you're much too bright. I sort of feel my GoPro shoots just a bit too bright for what I'm after, especially underwater, so I tend to bring it half a stop down, which makes the shadows, it makes the water look a lot better. It doesn't blow out the highlights like can be seen on a neutral exposure, and it also makes those shadows just look a little darker, which is kind of helps with contrast in the water. And when it comes to editing, we can actually pull those shadows up a touch or change it slightly from there on. Okay, now that we've gone through those little things as to why I use those settings, a couple other things to note with GoPros. Some people talk about fogging. I don't have a lot of problem with it spearfishing at all because the camera tends to be underwater the whole time. It's obviously very important to make sure the housing, inside of the housing and the camera is dry before you do anything. Or another little tip is there's the rabbit button, the one touch on off button on these. Now, I've only recently switched this on because I never really looked into it, but one touch button, camera turns on, starts recording, one touch off again. Now, I think most cameras are probably set up like that from the start, but it is the best way to save battery. Very simple, it's all as it is on your head is one button to turn the camera on, start recording, and one button to turn it off and turn the camera off. Now, that is a brilliant feature. Another couple little things is, of course, always check your housing periodically for cracks. The O-ring is very, very important. Now, when I put this on, I think the 5 and 6s are a little different, but for dive housings, whenever I clip this shut, I make a huge effort to check around the O-ring and make sure the latch is actually fixed both sides, because quite regularly you can shut it and it's kind of crooked. Then of course she's going to pop open and fill itself with water. And there you have it. Those are what I believe are the very best GoPro settings for spearfishing. Of course, these are negotiable for everyone. Frame rates and resolutions can obviously be selected for chosen projects. You know, if you're going to be doing a 4K project, it's probably worth shooting in 4K, as well as now the newer GoPros can shoot a higher frame rate. And I believe they have a little bit more data in the image too. So the 4K image on paper should be better than that camera there. Feel free to drop any comments down below or any questions you may have. I would actually like to do an editing video and actually how I edit the GoPro footage into videos, as well as that sort of scaling up and scaling down of footage as I mentioned before. And very final thing, a lot of the spearfishing content is dropped here basically on the Alive in NZ series, or you can click this little box up top to go to my second channel, my vlog channel, where there's a lot of stuff happening basically as you see it, as it happens. I'm usually only a few days behind real life with those videos. So thanks for watching. I'm Sam Price. I'll see you at the beach.